What's good folks, it's Nightmare Frame here with a new Warframe video. In this video I'll be talking about Eidolon Amps and the META Amp setups that will help take down the Eidolon shields fast and efficiently. For those who want to learn how to hunt Eidolons and what they are and the mechanics, please refer to my 2022 Eidolon Hunting Guide. The guides I do are for the people who want to improve and better themselves in the hunts. If you want to be fast and efficient, then stick around since there's a lot of min-maxing and requirements for the kind of runs we do. But for the casual player base looking for something basic, this video isn't for you. Eidolon hunts are gear intensive. You do need a lot of things including an amp, since it's going to be one of the main damage being dealt to the Eidolons. Besides the main Synovia DPS, the other three members will be spending most of their time in their operator. Make sure to finish your War Within and Saya's Vigil's quests, and start getting yourself acquainted with Onko, who is part of the Quill's Syndicate in Cetus. Upon doing so, you will immediately obtain your first amp. It's going to be a starter amp, also known as the Moat Amp. This is definitely not the amp you'll be using for Eidolons. Amps are the only weapons in the game that cannot be modded. An amp consists of three parts: the prism, the scaffold, and the brace. All three parts need to be crafted individually and combined to make the initial amp, which you then build, level, guild, and level again. Just like any other modular weapon, you can only get the final and best stats after gilding them. Let's get acquainted with the parts that go into making a complete amp. First, the prism, the primary fire mode, and also where you can earn mastery rank experience from. Second, you have the scaffold. It's the secondary fire mode, also the strongest firing mode, which will be used 90% of the time in the Eidolon hunts. And lastly, the brace. This determines your damage multipliers such as crits and crit multipliers. Each amp part is split into tiers. The higher you rank up in the Quills and Vox Solaris from Fortuna, the different amp parts you will obtain. Little Doug from Fortuna is associated with the Quills, so just like Onko and Cetus, she sells relatively the same items, but Fortuna specific. The first 4 tiers of amp parts are found in Cetus at Quill Onko, and the rest can be found in Fortuna at Little Duck. For the people first getting into the hunt, you won't have the best amp. You have to start somewhere. So if you're going for a straightforward horizontal progression, I suggest starting off with a 1-1-1, which is the Raplak, Pencha, and Klapkra. Use that until you level up in the Onko standing to get a 1-2-3, the Raplak, Shraksoon, and Lauren. I highly recommend to go for this combination if you are a beginner, as you work your way up to Little Duck. When you build up enough reputation in Vox Solaris, upgrade to the META Amp for Eidolon hunts, the 1-7-7, which is the Raplak Prism, Propa Scaffold, and Certus Brace. This is your best Eidolon hunting amp for the Void Strike user that grants high damage and precision strikes. Why the Tier 1 Prism is being used in most of the setups? Because both Tier 2 and Tier 7 scaffolds are projectile and have travel time, but the Tier 1 Prism is the highest damaging out of the prisms, it's hit scan, and has amazing crits, which is great for follow-up damage and taking out the shields and limbs in one go, even though it has less damage than the Propa Scaffold. Now, the Propa Scaffold is the highest damaging scaffold, but it does have its downsides. It suffers from fall-off damage and can knock you back if you aren't positioned properly. Fall-off represents the amount of damage you will deal to a target depending on your distance from it, as your damage will diminish the further away you are. When shooting with the Propa, it's all about timing, because it is a slow-moving projectile with a delayed explosion. You want to time it just before the Eidolon shields become vulnerable. This way you can pop the shields right away. This Propa timing is only viable after the first limb is taken down. As it slowly gets up from its staggered state, pay attention to the left leg of the Eidolon. It lifts it up to come to a full complete stand. So you want to shoot your Propa slightly before that, but the timing can change when your ping is factored in, meaning the higher the ping, the earlier you have to shoot, and the lower the ping, the more delayed your shots have to be. Keep an eye out on your ping because you might have to preemptively shoot or delay the shot, but this only applies if you're in a group and you are the client. If you're solo, then delay your shots even more. Let's say you're engaging the Terrorless for the first encounter. You don't have to use your Propa. So now, how do you shoot during your first and fourth shield phase? This is when your Raplak Prism comes in handy. Activate your Madurai Void Strike to buff your shot and trigger your Arcanes, and simply take out the shields in one shot. But do not quickly aim for the limb because sometimes the first lure may not be charged right away, so aim away from the limbs. But if you or your DPS have a charged lure, shoot the limb down to not waste any time. Also, there's another reason to utilize the Raplak during the Propa shots. So let's say you don't manage to deal the maximum amount of damage with your Propa due to fall off. You can easily follow up with your primary fire to deplete the shields, and the Raplak doesn't consume as much amp energy as the Propa, and this is why the 177 make an excellent combo. There's an amazing website called EIDOLON.com where you can practice your timing and shots for the Propa Scaffold. Now that you understand why the amp is used and how to use it, let's break down damage multipliers and how to min-max your DPS and shield takedown. But first, let's tackle the damage multipliers. Since the amps cannot be modded, we use various ways to buff their damage. There are 6 ways to increase the damage output of your amps. Number 1, Madurai Void Strike. This is a multiplicative scaling void damage buff for your amps. This is the operator's first ability under the Madurai Focus School. When activating this ability on your operator, you multiply your damage by 10% for a percentage of your energy consumed. So, on a full bar, you gain 1000% damage multiplier on your amps. Number 2, Madurai's Contamination Wave. This is the second ability under the Madurai Focus School. When cast, you send out a wave that debuffs the enemy to take 50% more operator damage for 20 seconds. Make sure you cast this on the Eidolon before dealing damage with your amps. This is going to be cast every shield rotation, as it's going to be part of the synergy for the damage increase on your amps to activate your amp Arcanes. Number 3, Arcanes. With the release of the Angels of Zariman, we were introduced to 2 new Arcanes that completely changed the meta of Eidolon hunts: Eternal Onslaught and Eternal Eradicate. Casting an operator ability will activate Eternal Eradicate, granting you 60% amp base damage. And the second Arcane, which replaces Virtuous Shadow, is Eternal Onslaught, which grants you 180% crit chance for 8 seconds on operator energy depletion. This will take your amp's critical chance above 100%, greatly increasing your damage and consistency. Now, how to utilize this? There are 3 ways. Number 1, being in void mode, casting your second ability to proc Eradicate, and then void slinging into the ground while hiding in void mode for the last bit of operator energy to be depleted. Another way is by simply casting your Void Strike, which triggers both Arcanes. And finally, casting your second ability and getting hit by the magnetic wave from the Sentient Energy Spike, procs magnetic to zap you of your energy, effectively triggering the Arcane. The great thing is that we have shield gating on operators, so we don't get one shot, but be sure to carry around some shield and health pizzas if you aren't confident. All these Arcanes are refreshable, and since the operator energy has a delay before it starts regenerating, you get free additional 2 seconds on Eternal Onslaught. And finally, this is an optional and additional source of damage: Magus Melt, an operator Arcane, which grants you a total of 210% additional heat damage on your amps after performing 7 Void Slings. Mind you, this is added heat and not damage conversion. This is very useful in one-tapping shields and limbs with a single Raplak shot, buffed with other Arcanes and Void Strike. This damage is further increased by stacking Volt Shields and fully stripping the Eidolon's armor, as the Eidolon's health is neutral to heat damage. The fourth way of buffing your amps is with UNAIRU Wisps. This is when the main DPS of the hunt uses their caustic strike on the Eidolon to spawn Wisps, which will increase the operator's damage by 100% for the next 20 seconds. Think of this as the serration mod for your amps. Also, make sure you're in range of the Wisp, as they will target the closest ally. And yes, UNAIRU Wisp will be additive to Eternal Eradicate. The fifth way of buffing your amps is with Volt's Shields. Volt Shields are the crucial and most consistent damage multiplier in Eidolon hunts, granting you 50% electric damage and 200% critical damage multiplier. The crit damage does not stack with additional shields, however, the electric damage will. When damaging the Eidolon shields, try your best to always keep an eye out for all your buffs and shoot through the Volt Shields. Shooting through the Volt Shields with a Propa Scaffold will lead you to position yourself accordingly, especially if you're in a full squad, where you will have one person on the left, middle, and right, so you don't detonate your Propa on your teammates and lose out on damage. Also, a reminder for the Propa's fall-off damage. Let's say you're shooting too far from the Eidolon, you will do decreased damage. So make sure you're at an appropriate distance, close, but not right on top of the Eidolon. And finally, number 6, Mastery Rank 30 Relay Damage Blessing. This damage blessing is a faction damage multiplier that affects all outgoing damage. Basically a Bane mod for your amps, multiplying your damage against the Eidolon by 25%. And this blessing is additive to other effects like Roar and faction mods. Alright, now for some advanced strats for shooting your Propa. You can do an instant detonation and frame detonation. Earlier, I did showcase and explain how the Propa projectile is slow and has a delayed explosion. Now, what if we want this projectile to instantly detonate and deal the damage right away? This is important during water shields. This term refers to when the Gauntlets and Hydralis spawn in their designated locations. So, let's start with the frame detonation. This is by placing your Warframe in front of the shield. You turn and face away from the Eidolon and cast your shield. And now you shoot your initial Propa shot off to the side, and slightly after that, you follow up with another Propa directed at your Warframe who's in front of the shields for that instant detonation. And you get a double detonation for that juicy instant shield pop. This is very useful to get those clean shields, but it does require a lot of practice. Okay, now finally moving on to pre-shielding. I will show you 2 ways to pre-shield for each spawn to get those clean water shields. These pre-shields will be split from Propa and Raplak takedowns. The reason the Propa water shields are placed in this way is, for one, so they instantly detonate on the terrain, and secondly, Propa has fall-off damage, so placing them in specific spots will hit the Eidolons with little to no fall-off. Because as the Eidolons spawn out of the water, they have a weird hitbox. They physically appear in the water, but they are actually almost on land, and Gauntlets and Hydralis will have slightly different Propa shields, as shown here. Now for the Raplak shields, fairly simple. These shields also work if you're using the 1, 2, 3 amp, and are commonly used in the current solo hunting strats to avoid some bad knockbacks. Now for those who still don't have amp arcane adapters to run 2 arcanes, there's another amp setup for you guys. And this is the 577, using the Specific Prism and utilizing the Virtuous Shadow amp arcane. This arcane grants you 60% crit chance when you land a headshot. The Specific Prism is a burst fire prism with decent damage, but this burst fire can easily help you trigger the arcane without wasting too much amp energy, but you do lose out on the guaranteed crits. So this is the case if your Propa doesn't crit, you have to follow up with the primary fire. This is an old strat, but still works today. So this is your guide to the meta amps for Eidolon hunts. A reminder to refer to my Eidolon hunting guide as an introduction to the hunts and what goes on in them. Alright, that has been it from me. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe for more Warframe content and so much more. Do refer to the description. Thanks for watching, stay tuned for more, and as always, peace. Yo, clean! Look at that! I did the portal! Yo, that was actually my first portal. That was pretty clean. How could I?